You're listening to Opera Box Score.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Wherever you are, however you're listening, it's America's talk radio show about opera. It's Opera Box Score. I'm Weston Williams, joined by Oliver Camacho. All right, this week, Frederica von Stade, a living legend, takes a free throw on the role of the mother in Dead Man Walking and reveals the heartbreak of being a mother working in opera. Then we go inside the huddle with tenor Gwilym Bowen, who is setting his voice to Christmas Oratorio and Messiah mode as we enter into the most magical season of all. Plus, in the 2-minute drill, Peter Gelb is jockeying for a cabinet position with a promise to make opera great again. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, click follow on Apple Podcasts, hit the plus sign, email us your hot takes by writing to mailbag@operaboxscore.com or upload a voice memo using the You Got Something to Say tab on our website, operaboxscore.com. However you contribute, you'll get an OBS beer coaster, an OBS lapel pin, and a #1 OBS fan foam finger just for sharing your own hot take. Oliver, it's you and me and sports?
Well, I actually had a Messiah to prepare for this weekend. I sang tenor solos in my annual Messiah. And those of you who've been listening to the podcast for the past couple of months, you probably figured that something was going on in my life because my voice sounds like hell. And I honestly was practicing and vocalizing more than I have since maybe I was in college, just trying to get my voice in shape for this thing. And by some miracle, I'm thanking the goddess of the glottis. I was able to pull through yesterday and sing. I mean, it wasn't my best, but I made some choices that I sold as being rhetorical choices as opposed to, well, this is all that I've got for you choices. So that was my sport of this week, trying to get my voice into shape. But I did miss the ATP Nito finals, the season-ending championship for the men's tour, and I'm sad.
Have you tried the goddess glottis? Let's talk some opera.
Free throw.
We're going to start this episode with the free throw. Even though that's a shorter segment, we cannot put Frederica von Stade in the B block of this episode. So she gets the A block because she is a legend. And I was lucky to interview her for my radio show, which will air this Saturday. And she had a few minutes to spare. And I wanted to ask her about the role of the mother in Dead Man Walking, because she brought it up naturally in the course of our other interview. So I wanted to expound upon it and why she felt so connected to that music. And it's pretty surprising where the conversation led, in a way almost heartbreaking. So before we hear that 10 minutes of conversation, here is Frederica von Stade singing the Arioso from Dead Man Walking from the second commercial recording from Houston Grand Opera conducted by Patrick Summers. In our formal interview for my other job, you began to talk about Jake Heggie and singing the mother in Jake Dead Man Walking, Mrs. Desrochers. I forget her first name and her character's name.
I don't know. They never had one.
Oh, okay. And you recorded it twice. Once with the world premiere recording, and then a second time, I guess, with Joyce DiDonato, and that's Houston. I forget what
Right.
company that is. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's hard for me to listen to that because it's so devastating. And I think when the audience hears you do it, they think about you as Cherubino and as Charlotte and as, Melisande. And you grew up and you had a kid who turned out to be Joe Desrochers. And you were celebrated for you're celebrated for your simplicity that you bring to music. You bring this authentic quality to everything you sing, which, sort of translates as like, oh, it's such a simple, clean, straightforward presentation, even though we know it's so hard to be simple,
Right.
And so you bring that, I don't want to say naivety, but like this sense of simplicity to the mother, and it makes it more heartbreaking.
Well, in the last 20 years, I've worked with a lot of families. I volunteer at a daycare center. I did. That daycare center is left. I volunteered a lot at this school in Oakland called St. Martin de Porres, and I work alone for 20 years with Young Musicians Choral Orchestra, which is a program for kids from 8 to 18 to try and get them into college. And all of these kids are from very low income backgrounds. So in many ways, I know what it's like for these people, for many people who are struggling with paying the bills, of getting their kids to school on time, of everything that happens. It's so much. It's so much. Things that I've never had to deal with in my life. But even more pertinent is just a basic fact of motherhood is nobody can be a perfect mother. They just can't do it. We're human. What was really, really more potent for me was the mistakes that I was able to examine in playing this role in my motherhood. What being a professional singer, how that complicated life for my kids, and some of the fallout that they've had to deal with from things that I've done in my life. And that's what was really pertinent in putting that role together.
I'm shocked that you're sharing this with us because, of course, you had this international career. Of course, you were singing all over the world. And we often talk to our guests, if they're parents, about what their support system was. How did they manage to take care of their kids? Who was there to help them? What resources were opera companies giving? I mean, we know now somebody like Francesca Zambello is very aware of this need in the opera industry to provide spaces for families. But when you were in the prime of your career, was anybody thinking about mothers?
Well, that's really interesting, Oliver, because in the generation before me, there was really just Jackie, Marilyn Horne, and Joan who had kids. A lot of singers did not have kids back then. I mean, Placido, I'm talking about women. In my generation, I felt that changed a lot. Kiri Takano is a really good friend of mine. And we didn't start it by any means, but it sort of started with our generation that a lot of singers wanted to be moms. I wanted to be a mom more than I wanted to be a singer. And now it's much more accommodating through pregnancy and delivery and all the dates. But it's still, you're away. And when I used to see my books before iPhones saying when I had to be away, I'd literally the week before, I would be sick to my stomach every day. It emotionally just got me. Now, when you get there, yes, you have a busy life, but you have a life that's mainly centered around the theater. So you just go to the theater. I've lived in all these great places and I didn't go see a bunch of things, because I was either moping over being away from my children or studying my score. But I know it did cost my girls in little ways, and they're very forgiving. But it's, you miss it's the daily routine, and in some ways they've expanded because of it as well, by becoming independent and having traveled all over the world. But there's not a professional mother. There's not a mother in today's world who doesn't have a certain amount of guilt for being away from their children. It's not because we just want to feel guilty. It's because it's part of the psychic energy of motherhood that you fall in love with your children. You really do.
I've always thought that the children of opera singers would make perfect candidates to work for the CIA or for the State Department because they're used to traveling. They have passports already. They might learn languages. They might learn to adapt really quickly to different cultures.
That's so interesting because my mom worked for the CIA.
Oh.
Yeah, so my mom, she wasn't a singer, but she worked for the agency for a number of years, 50 years ago. But I know I have to ask you one question.
Sure.
Are you still singing a lot?
I mean, the audience knows that I have my gigs. I do like my Messiahs. And if somebody does a Monteverdi Vespers, I'm there for it. I do a lot of early music and art song. I've never developed a technique that was, loud enough for opera per se, but Baroque opera, sure. But,
Yeah.
So, no, I'm watching all these kids, in their 20s and in their 30s, find opportunity in Baroque opera that didn't exist when I was trying. And I'm very
Right.
jealous of them,
Right.
So I was born in the wrong generation.
Oh, because I hear in your speaking voice, I hear so much resonance.
That's very kind.
Yeah, no, it's not kind. I mean it.
I'm known more for coloratura than I am for resonance, but thank you.
Great. You ought to look at some of the male coloratura things and the
I know all of them.
You-
Trust me. Give me a Zeffiro Torna or
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know all of that stuff. So yeah.
Okay.
Well, Frederica von Stade, thank you for spending so much time with me. And it's really, I don't even know how to tell you how much your career has meant to me and how many hours and hours of pleasure I've had listening to you. And that recording of you singing Anio, I know it's like a stunt casting to put you as Anio in that opera. But that recording, especially that duet you sang with Lucia Popp, I think might be one of the most exquisite things you've ever recorded.
Oh, thank you. Well, you are amazing. Keep doing. You're putting a lot of spirit into the opera world. You really are. It's very valuable and very precious. So just keep that energy going. It's easy to forget about opera in today's world, and
Yeah.
all the young singers have had so much to deal with COVID and everything else. My heart just breaks for them,
And then there's an election looming.
Oh, God. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee.
Sol
a duet from Mozart's La Clemenza di Tito, Lucia Popp as Servilia, and our guest Frederica von Stade as Anio, from the recording conducted by Sir Colin Davis, made sometime in the 70s, I'm sure. One of my all-time favorite recordings. Such a stunningly beautiful duet, and the whole album is actually quite good. But yeah, definitely a luxury casting to have Frederica von Stade as Anio. And I have to thank the publicist for Musica Viva New York. Musica Viva New York is about to release a recording, which is going to be Frederica von Stade's final recording. She said to me in my formal interview with her that this recording is her last. She sings a movement from a cantata by Joseph Turin. I don't even know the cantata. It's something about crimson and crimson roses or something. Anyway, that's not as important as Frederica von Stade herself, but it is a little sad to think that she will no longer make recordings. I mean, she's very retired, but you know, there was always a chance that she might throw in one more for us, but that was it.
Huddle up. Let's go inside the huddle.
So here's our feature interview, our feature Inside the Huddle with a Baroque specialist tenor. I know we've had a lot of tenors on lately, but as Frederica von Stade suggested, or as I responded to Frederica von Stade, this is just the type of tenor whose career I should be having if I were younger and whiter. Gwilym Bowen is returning to Chicago. He's already here, obviously, to perform the Evangelist in Bach's Christmas Oratorio with music of the Baroque conducted by Jane Glover. Those performances are this weekend, Sunday the 24th in Skokie, and Monday, November 25th at Symphony Center in downtown Chicago. I wanted to talk to Gwilym because he is, a tenor that you're going to hear a lot during Passion season and during Messiah and Christmas Oratorio season. And I wanted to see how he manages his calendar, knowing that every year he's going to have to block out, March and April and November and December for these regular gigs. How does he fit opera into that type of calendar? But before we do listen to him respond to that question, here's a little bit of Gwilym Bowen singing Handel from the Brauchus Passion with the Academy of Ancient Music, conducted by Stephen Devine.
Schau mich mal im Strand in den Wiesen, dir zu Fuße, in den Wiesen, dir zu Fuße, lass mir deine Gnade erscheinen. Lass mir deine Gnade erscheinen.
I mean, one thing that is very, very common in the UK, at least, is the summer festival opera season. Very often the country house opera, which generally, conveniently, really starts to rehearse sort of right after about Easter Day, and then takes you through the summer, which is really quite handy to fit in a nice little operatic contract. There's normally time, if things are working out, maybe to do one after that, but I don't enormously love doing two in a year. I think one is normally enough, especially if it's taking you away.
One opera a year.
Yeah. I mean, that's a decent chunk of any calendar year. And if you're away from home on one or more, that's basically half the year away, which I've got a garden to think about.
And apparently a spouse too.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. True. Yeah. That was possibly not the case when last time we met.
Okay.
Because we got married last year.
Oh, congratulations!
Thank you very much.
I lost my chance.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah.
So, what type of operas what type of roles do you think will be added to your repertoire as you do these one a year, like the old way, when people learned one role,
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to imagine a world where there was more sort of structure and will to what I'm doing, but to be honest, it tends to be what I'm offered. So, I mean,
which is what, like Handel, Britain?
Yeah, Handel, Britain, Monteverdi are the sort of things I could reliably assume I might be doing from year to year, and then I'm doing. Oh gosh, who's it by? a clue as to how obscure some of these things can be. Oh, my brain's gone completely blank about the opera I'm doing
What
this
country?
summer, which is in Germany
Okay.
at the Halle Festival, but it's not Handel, and I'm absolutely blanking.
What language is it in?
It's in German and Italian.
Kaiser?
It is Kaiser. It's Kaiser's Octavia.
Oh, wow.
My brain.
Oh, Octavia.
Which
Kaiser.
I think they're actually doing at the
Boston is doing
this
it.
year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, so good. You'll be on hand in case.
Well, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think emergencies work transatlantically. What with the visa situations?
That's true. That's true.
Probably
Yeah.
vice versa as well. But yeah, I am available for Piso.
Yeah.
I remember the actual details of the opera.
I wonder if that was written for Hamburg.
It was, yeah.
Okay.
So it was one of the Hamburg period when Kaiser was there at the same period as young Handel and
Yeah.
Telemann and all the boys.
Those operas are so bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, you go from Recit in German to a beautiful aria in Italian, then you're back to Recit in German. It's completely not how, well, anything works.
Yeah.
And just reading recently about opera seria in general and about how various eras of artistic reception have struggled to make this obviously ludicrous thing where 30 da capo arias in a row happen. And even more ludicrously when they're switching between language as well.
But what's cool about the Hamburg operas is that it was like an international town.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so
yeah.
you get like some even French dance music, thrown in sometimes. And then you have these Italian aria styles, but then you get sometimes like rustic comic characters. So it feels like proto Magic Flute or something with dance music,
Yeah. And I mean, it's nice to do, having done Coronation of Popea, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 times, maybe more. It's nice to do sort of, I mean, as everyone except Nero at the moment.
Okay.
So
you're Soldado 1, Soldado 2, the guy that does a duet,
Lucano, Arnalto once.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which is, I mean, enormous fun, very, very difficult.
It's just a little bit too high, right?
It's very, very high. It's very high. But Nero, in case anyone's looking for a Nero.
No, we don't want the octave apart.
No one
Nero,
does.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
everyone.
Not anymore.
But
you have the hair for it.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I can be extremely unpleasant. So yeah, it's fun to do a little temporal sequel. For another of the revolts against Nero.
So, getting back to your operatic repertoire, what tenor that we might be familiar with, maybe one of your countrymen, or oh god, that's the wrong thing to say, right? Maybe in the same part of the world, whose career you might fashion yourself after, based on the type of singing you like to do and your voice is built.
I mean, I think probably Probably number one favourite guy is probably Anthony Rolfe Johnson, and then it's so invidious ranking people. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to go number one, and then
and then it's a tie for second.
Philip Langridge.
Yes.
Someone no one has ever heard of, which is my granddad, who was a very, very fine Welsh singer. He didn't do a lot of opera, and also not very much recording, but by the name of Kenneth Bowen, who had a extraordinary expressiveness to his voice, and absolutely talking about Arnaldo, he did at the proms, he sang ottone at the pitch of ottone, so a low countertenor role, but in high tenors he was an extraordinary singer. And I mean, so many guys.
Anthony Rolfe Johnson and Philip Langridge are a great place to start.
Yeah.
Anthony Rolfe Johnson, to me, like, always had beautiful, beautiful tone. And no offense meant, but the English tenor model, I don't always think of tone quality as their strongest, attribute.
It's a funny. I mean, it's so based around the central character of Peter Pears, who, I don't know, I'd be prepared to go to the wall for Peter Pears. I think it was a wonderful, wonderful singer, and such an interesting I mean, obviously as the creator of Britain's roles, but for example, just doing in 1945, I think Peter Grimes, and then 1948 Albert Herring, just that way round.
Yeah,
and,
it seems backwards.
And I mean, no one casts Peter Grimes like that anymore. And Albert Herring tends to be. I mean, I've probably aged out of Albert Herring, which I haven't. I am also available for. But yeah, the beauty and warmth of Anthony Robb Johnson is something that you would just always come back to, because it's just so. Well, yeah, I think warmth is the term, and something I'd strive, if not to emulate, then to keep as a aesthetic aim, is to have warmth, unless you're obviously in a context where warmth is exactly not what you want, which obviously he could do as well. But obviously that comes up. One needs to be cold and or frightening and or what have you. Glowing, that's another one.
Yeah. Well, now let's talk about this repertoire that you're doing all the time, which is Passion music of Bach, and even this Christmas Oratorio, which sort of is in the same mold. I heard you singing the St. Matthew Passion 2 years ago, I guess it was, before you were married, when you were still available.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. And I just remember that it was so dramatically committed, and that it was surprising in some places, and that there were some parts where you were singing, and there were some risks that you were taking that felt like, oh, what if that didn't work? Like, and like I even heard maybe a couple times like it fell off, or the tone was a little bit just not beautiful, And I appreciated so much. Like, this to me is like what this can be, because if it's just beautifully sung, it's just so deadly boring.
Yeah.
So what is the negotiation that you make with yourself? Like how much you're willing to take, where you're willing to take your instrument in the Passion, and how ugly can it be? And where do you draw the line? And then also factoring in if you are asked to sing arias.
Yeah. It's such a big question. I think there's a lot of different factors that add up to how free you can be on any given night. So, for example, we weren't in, I've forgotten the name of the arts centre where it was here.
When you did it, that was Harris Theatre.
Harris Theatre, that's it. Wonderful sort of cavernous space, which means, okay, I'm can't be whispering through this. That's whereas there's acoustics where you can go completely down to nothing. So I'm going to have to stay probably more fully on the voice. But I also have the freedom of this luxury continuo section, who are just amazingly responsive. And I know that if I do something untoward or unusual leading into a chorus, which happens a lot in those recitatives, that Jane and the amazing chorus are going to like jump off of that same energy, and we'll have sort of hopefully a sort of virtuous feedback between each other there. So that gives you a good deal of freedom. Conversely, if you're somewhere just brutally dry, or if you have a continuo team who don't have, necessarily the experience with it, or have it under their fingers, or know the kind of parameters that most evangelists are going to be operating within, you may have to be a bit more conservative, and probably, like you say, like it might get a bit boring. It also can be quite boring to do if you're in that situation. If you have a lot more freedom, that is never going to get boring. And also, boring is the wrong word, because it's... Well, I've made the grievous error of getting so interested in the Bach recitatives. I've just started a PhD on them. So I'm really, really down the rabbit hole with what's going on in sort of brutal detail of not just the evangelist stuff, but I mean all of the Secca recitatives and all the cantatas and stuff. So there's always something, even if it's just for yourself, you can take out, even if you're having a grim night in I don't know, some empty church in a wet, abandoned part of England, which can happen.
Do you, when you first start rehearsals, do you like get the lay of the land? It's like, oh, it's going to be one of those. You know?
It's pretty quick, I think. Yeah. Yeah. And it's pretty dispiriting. And the other one is if a conductor is insisting on conducting recitatives, and I've done some of those which have been not terrible, but it's not a good sign.
Is it for rhythmic, like forward movement, or just so he knows how to get into the choruses?
I can't think of a good reason for it. And yeah, generally that the only reason you're going to save one of those is perhaps if there's a conspiracy with the continuous section to just ignore what's going on. Obviously, at certain junctures, a little bit of input from the front is welcome and or surprising or exciting. And as you say, for like getting into choruses, that's hardly surprising.
I think the name of this episode is going to be The Continual Conspiracy.
Yeah.
That's a great turn of phrase there.
Might be my PhD title.
So what about, I know I gave you a long question before, how you negotiate what you're doing with your voice when you know you have to sing arias, and how do you budget, tone?
Yeah. It's not easy. I still find that the hardest thing to do. And Bach also is in the habit of giving, in these large pieces, wildly contrasting arias. So just to get outside the Christmas Oratorio, if you're doing the John Passion and you have to sing Ach mein Sinn and Erwäge as well, just completely different voices. And it's the same for the bass who has to sing Alt and Mein Teure Heiland as well. Just such different technique required. I mean, technique, whatever. Approach. So that doesn't help. I think you mostly just have to trust the feedback you're getting from your body, really. And if things start to go the wrong way, then maybe you can play things a bit more safely if you see there's a lot of the night left. Christmas Oratorio is very end heavy for the tenors. There's this enormous and I mean for me I just find it amazingly searingly moving recit and aria at the very end of the sixth cantata of all six cantatas, which is quite a heavy sing, and if you've spent too much on some of the recits, you're going to be in trouble. So yeah, seeing that coming, you might want to not spend too much effort describing the geography, which quite a lot of Christmas Oratorio recitative is a bit of a geography lesson.
We're out of time, but we began talking before I started hitting the record button about national styles of singing, and I learned that one of your early voice teachers was Swedish, and we began talking about just national styles of singing. And just for the audience who's interested, can you just say what you might generalization about how English people learn how to sing? In choir, mostly.
Yeah, well, that's the truth, isn't it? It is in choirs, mostly, and that, again, big generalization warning, can lead to a certain amount of constriction and a certain amount of lack of freedom, and also a sort of lack of expressive will or potential, because you're doing what you should be doing in a choir, which is being part of a unit rather than your own special expressive autonomous self. But I think there's a lot of singers who've come from that choral tradition and because of, or a combination of because of and in spite of it, are extremely fantastic, expressive and free singers.
Like Gaston Davies.
Yeah.
I can't think of a more expressive singer sometimes. So.
And I mean, so in the John's Cambridge choir of his exact time, you had also Alan Clayton and Ed Lyon. I'm sure there were more who I'm embarrassed to be forgetting now, but I mean, Alan is just fabulous singing.
And he's
Ed,
a beast
obviously.
on stage too.
Yeah. I mean, both of them just you could not, if you were plonked down and said, okay, identify the person in this cast who was a nice little choir boy, you would not be, it's that one. So I don't know. I mean, as with all things, probably the borders of national styles are probably being eroded for. Is that a good thing? I don't know. There's also distinctly, if one were to really get into things, there'd be distinctive Welsh singing and distinctive Irish singing, and
But you can tell an American, can't you?
yes, yeah, most of the time. Yeah. But again, there are also
because we don't really have. I mean, I'll say two things. We don't really have a national singing style for classically trained singers.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say, like in the past 20 years, American English singers who do American English very well has become a thing.
Yeah.
But it hasn't always been a thing, you know.
I mean, in general, again, big flashing neon sign in general. Just the state of like vocal technique pedagogy has been more advanced in the US for quite a long time, I think.
Yes, we know.
So yeah, like vocal technique on a bass level is very often a good deal higher, and like in general, just louder.
And in general, just very general, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what we're known for.
That's not
louder, better technique, and just general singing.
Loud goes a long way.
Yeah.
It takes
Gwilym Bowen, in some of his signature repertoire that was De Posuit from Bach's Magnificat, performed at the Leipzig Bachfest with an ensemble called Solomon's Knot. I don't have to thank anybody because I arranged that interview all by myself after accosting Gwilym Bowen on the street saying, let me interview you.
Held him at gunpoint.
It's very nice. He even we were looking for a quiet place to record. It's like, well, I guess we'll go to my hotel room, And I was like, yes. But I promise there's no hanky panky. He's married now, so.
Spread the word about Opera Box Score by giving us a rating on Apple Podcasts. And if you have a few extra moments, why not write us a review, a good one or else. But at the minimum, tell one person you know who loves opera about the show and secretly favorite the podcast on their iPhones when they're not looking. 2-minute drill. It's up next.
This just in. The 2-minute drill.
All right, listen up. Here's everything you need to know about what happened in Operaland this week.
In a New York Times editorial, Met General Manager Peter Gelb suggests that he, and he alone, can make opera great again in America. It's clear to me that the solution to sustaining opera is through artistic reinvention, both with new operas by living composers and reimagined productions of classics that can resonate with audiences of today. He then goes on to blame the shortcomings of his stewardship of the company on, quote, resistance to substantial artistic change from administrators, academics, and critics. while throwing Ligeti's Le Grand Macabre under the bus as an example of an opera that would not resonate broadly.
I'm choosing not to take that personally. Critics were quick to tackle Gelb, including friend of the show David Salazar's reaction on Opera Wire, describing his manifesto as a veiled chastisement of the people he feels aren't lining up with his agenda or treating his projects fairly. And Anne Majette, who ponders, I have no idea why the New York Times feels it's appropriate to give what amounts to free advertorial space to Peter Gelb, rather than having a critic interview him and challenge him on some of his oft-stated positions.
The Met has announced Italian conductor Daniele Rustioni as principal guest conductor beginning next season. Currently the music director at Opera Nationale de Lyon, Rustioni has conducted in every major international opera house. He was the first ever principal guest conductor of the Bavarian State Opera and was music director of Orchestra della Toscana and served as its artistic director.
Ukrainian bass Alexander Tsambaluk is speaking out against the inclusion of Putin supporter Ildar Abdrazakov at the Teatro San Carlo in their upcoming production of Don Carlo. Quote, unfortunately, I found out about Abdrazakov's participation in this production only after signing the contract, said Tsambaluk. The ban on performances by Russian singers in European theaters should come from the theaters themselves and not from the self-exclusion of Ukrainian artists from productions with Russian colleagues. As a Ukrainian, I feel pride in the opportunity to represent my culture on the international stage and thereby remind the world of the resilience and strength of my people.
The UK's Streetwise Opera has launched an emergency €120,000 fundraiser to ensure its survival, marking the most critical appeal in the charity's 22-year history. The country's only opera company dedicated to working with homeless people has experienced increasing strain as grants from trusts and foundations disappear.
Puccini while driving, the future is now! Apple Music Classical has been fully integrated into Apple CarPlay, allowing listeners to access playlists and their library more safely while driving.
Major award time. Ukrainian conductor Oksana Liniv has won the Bavarian Culture Prize from the Bayernwerk Energy Company and the Bavarian Ministry of Art. Meanwhile, the Marie-José Kravis Prize for New Music went to composers David Lang and friend of the show Missy Mazzoli, netting them $200,000 each and commissions for the New York Philharmonic.
In trade news, Opera America has announced the upcoming retirement of President and CEO Mark Skorka, who has served the organization since 1990. For many of us in the industry, there is simply no Opera America without Mark Skorka, said board chair Leanne Myslevsky. His leadership and service to our ever-changing field has been constant and incredibly transformative. Skorka's successor, who has not been named, will take over in 2026.
Crunching the numbers, the renovation and expansion of the Stuttgart Opera House will take at least 4 years longer than originally planned. Even worse, the price tag of the project could rise to between 1.5 and 2 billion euros. That's correct.
Jeez.
Billion. We Google translated that to make sure. Up from the original estimate of 1 billion. Critics of the project are now calling for alternative solutions, including scaling back all new construction and focusing on renovation of older facilities.
Exit stage right, South African mezzo-soprano and teacher Sarita Stern has died at age 92. Stern performed primarily in Austria, as well as her home country, and enjoyed a long career teaching voice at the University of Cape Town. She also wrote a book about her life as a singer entitled The Inner Voice of Sound.
Italian tenor Giuseppe Morino has died at the age of 74. The bel canto specialist made a name for himself in the 1980s for his performance of Pilade in Ermione. He went on to perform a number of lesser-known Italian works in the great Italian houses and left an extensive library of recorded work.
And on this day, November 18th, in 1741, Handel arrives in Dublin at the invitation of the country of Ireland to attend concert season. In 1763, Leopold Mozart and his two kids, Wolfgang and Maria, arrived in Paris on their European concert tour. In 1786, it was the birth of English conductor and composer Henry Rowley Bishop in London. He was the first composer to ever be knighted. In 1786, it is the generally accepted date of birth of the German composer Carl Maria von Weber. In 1836, British playwright Sir William Gilbert in London, he wrote librettos for the Gilbert and Sullivan operettas.
In 1860, it was the birth of Polish composer and pianist Jan Ignacy Paderewski. In 1882, Amelita Galli-Curci, the Italian soprano, was born in Milan. In 1899, Hungarian-born American conductor Eugene Normandy was born, and on this day, November 18th in 1930, it was the first performance of Dmitri Shostakovich's The Nose.
And that is your 2-minute drill.
Just a little bit of the birthday girl Amelita Galli-Curci in 1928 singing a song by, maybe his best known song, by Sir Henry Bishop, Home Sweet Home. That very old recording featured pianist Homer Samuels. Thank you, Homer, for your contribution to on this day.
Thanks, Homer. Let's talk about the big news of the week. Our good friend Pete. I really recommend all our listeners go and read this editorial in the New York Times. It is, if nothing else, extremely entertaining. It's got everything from the rather bold claim that opera started slipping from its creative peak after Puccini, and then in the next sentence mentioning Strauss and Janacek. And then in the inclusion of criticizing Le Grand Macabre by George Ligeti in a paragraph that doesn't actually go anywhere other than to say that Peter Gelb once met Ligeti, and Ligeti was concerned that spiders might come in if you left the door open. And I don't know what that means. This is truly a kind of fascinating look, I think, into Peter Gelb's mind. Obviously, I think it was maybe like a month or two ago, there was the story that dropped about Peter Gelb complaining about the reception of Grounded, which seemed to be perhaps allegedly a sort of a manufactured complaint in order to raise awareness about Grounded that he leaked to the press. And this kind of feels like an extension of that in a lot of ways. He correctly talks about how, like, you know, the future of opera is in new work and recontextualizing old work, which I do frankly agree with. And I think that basically anyone who's serious about the future of the art form agrees with. But he goes on this kind of weird tirade, you know, talking about how, you know, there's so much resistance to it. And, you know, he does seem to be wanting to blame everyone but himself. And now I think we tend to be a little hard on Peter Gelb, and I think there's a reason for that.
It's so easy to make fun of him.
It's true. The Metropolitan Opera is the largest performing arts organization in the country, not just the largest opera in the U.S., but the largest performing arts organization, period. So I think it's very interesting to see an article by him that sort of refuses to acknowledge that he is kind of the arbiter of this sort of thing. And we know that the Met's commitment to new works has appeared really only recently, well into his tenure as the general manager of the Met. And it's just interesting to me to see his sort of ahistorical analysis of why opera is in the place that it is in the United States, especially not talking about the importance of the Met as an institution, and especially the importance of the Met as an institution under Peter Gelb. The backlash, I think, is the really entertaining part of this story. Anne Majette's post, which we read a little bit of, was posted on Facebook, is a brutal dragging of Peter Gelb that I was very entertained by.
I co-sign it. It's awesome.
It was great. I don't think I see really many people supporting Peter on this particular article.
I'm going to just start with what Amjad says, is that, yeah, and what you already mentioned, that he doesn't take any responsibility for his own mistakes. And, like the Met machine, for the whatchamacallit, for the ring cycle, that was his idea, right?
Yeah. That was a Peter Gelb,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
And there was also that awful Tosca that came out early in his tenure. And some other things like that, where you're like, okay, you're talking about, doing the classics in a way that'll resonate with today's audiences. Is that your idea for what will resonate with modern audiences, doing that version of the ring cycle, which was a failure? And I've yet to hear him claim that as a failure, and apologize for that and how expensive it was. It's so expensive that's, I think, tied to, them beginning to like raid their endowment for funds to continue to meet out his vision. There were successes, but I think he lucked out with something like Fire Shut Up in My Bones and Champion meeting a moment and being able to pivot quickly because of the pandemic and because of social justice matters that were really top of mind, coming out of the closures due to the pandemic. That was very lucky. And, he had a great run of Porgy and Bess before the pandemic, and then tried to capitalize on that by like putting it on a second time, but it didn't do as well the second time. So, swings and misses. Yeah. And Grounded is yet to be, it's yet, we don't know yet, like if that opera has lasting power, I tend to agree with his idea that critics can be very harsh on things that, that are new, not because the critics aren't educated or are rooting against the Met, but because they go to so much opera and because they go, and they know what the company is producing on a day-to-day basis. They recognize what is actually a superior effort. But if you think about an audience member going to the theater for the first time to see Grounded, and are impressed by Emily D'Angelo or impressed by the set design, that's a win, People going to see The Hours to hear Kelly O'Hara sing, that's a win. The Akhenaten production, which did have a very, visionary production, the stage direction, and we talked to people that were in that production, that's a win,
Yeah.
So it's not all strikes for Peter Gelb, but as much as he, is only thinking about the great things he's done, I do think that we need to, take a look at a list of everything that's been done. And like Amjad says, remember that, Fanciulla was a success, but there were 12 other world premieres in the ensuing decades after Fanciulla, and most of them were not big successes. And that's how this business works. You have to do a lot and have failures in order to know what's going to work and to get to really great things. But in this time, I understand the position he's in, because there's limited resources, there's limited audience, and every show has to have winning elements. And it seems like on a whole, audiences are down and revenue is down. So maybe you don't have the answers.
I think one of the things that rubs a lot of people the wrong way is talking about like past operas from, 100 years ago that were successful. And like, what does successful even mean in 2024 compared to 1904? Right? Like, it's not the same industry anymore. Like there were clacks back then, that you could pay to clap for you. We don't have that anymore. And like we have,
now we have an app for that.
We've got social media. We've got the Met Live in HD broadcast. It's truly kind of baffling to me how many of the most social media friendly operas that have come out in the last that the Met has produced over the last couple of seasons never actually went out live in HD. I mean, I think especially of the John Adams, what was it? Il Nino was not alive in HD, even though I saw it have an organic presence from pirated clips on TikTok, and I think that's a very easy one to sort of like point out as like, that's the one that you need in the theaters, right? That's the one that has the cool visuals, that has the modern style that you could really, and I'm sure there were contractual reasons for it. Maybe John Adams was not having whatever the Met offered for streaming rights or whatever. But there have been several instances like that in the past few years, especially, where there are just a lot of missed opportunities. And it feels like a lot of these big successes, like Akhenaten, almost feel accidental in some ways. And we could talk about this, at length. This could have been a whole chalk talk, honestly. But we should probably move on to something slightly less controversial than Peter Gelb, the Russia and Ukraine conflict.
Yeah, I mean, we just touch on this really quickly. It's like, now we're moving into this very scary time for some of us. Maybe not everybody in the audience, but a lot of us are nervous about what's going to happen with our country's foreign policy and support of Ukraine. I feel for Alexander Tsimbaluk. Just last week, we talked about Jonas Kaufman saying that, we should give Anna Netrebko some grace, but I don't know. Right now, it feels like we need to support democratic countries right now. As long as we're still a democratic country, we need to support other democracies. So even though I used to adore Ildar Odbrazakov, I am sort of on the side of Alexander Tsimbaluk and on the side of keeping Anna Netrebko under the carpet for a little bit longer.
Speaking of things changing in America, let's talk about things changing in opera America.
I need to recuse myself from this.
Mark Skorka, I mean, he's led the organization since 1990. I didn't realize he'd been in charge for that long. I think Opera America has become a more significant organization over the last, 30 plus years of his tenure.
Let me just say this, because like the more I hear you talk about Opera America, the more I start to get angry, and I just want to let this off my chest. Over the years, not just this podcast, but another podcast I used to be on, and probably still am on if we ever get together again, have done what we can to support and amplify the work of Opera America. Not once have I ever felt their support.
Yeah.
And that means that I'm nobody to them. So new leadership of Opera America, contact us and let's try to do something together, huh?
I mean, obviously we have a little bit of a special interest here, being a podcast about opera, but I think, investing in those sort of fringe elements of opera on the outside, the outskirts, I think is very important. And you know what?
We can't be considered fringe at this point. What else is out there that centers opera like we do?
We are opera. You're sounding more and more like Peter Gelb by every moment. Opera America, Oliver is available and willing to take over your organization and rule with an iron fist. Let's wrap this show up.
Good call, bad call on Opera Box Score.
Good call, bad call. That's how we end the show. Oliver Camacho.
My good call is that we are going to continue to amplify the great works of friends of the show. And we want to remind you that friend of the show, Kimon Murat, will be giving his Marian Anderson Vocal Award recital next month at the Kennedy Center, the Washington National Opera. So mark your calendars for December 17th. If you've not heard Kimon Murat sing, you are missing something. So please, please, please check it out if you're there.
That's it for this week's edition of America's Talk Radio show about opera. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Get your voice heard and find links to stuff we've talked about at our website, operaboxscore.com. That is also where you can put your money where our mouths are. Give back to the OBS using the Support the Team tab. Your announcer is Norm Waddell. Your creative consultant is Oliver Camacho, and your audio editor is me. The executive producer of the OBS is George Cedarquist. For our guest, Frederica von Stade and Gwilym Bowen, I'm Weston Williams, asking you to continue the conversation about opera as you shut the door behind you to keep out all the spiders. We're back with an all-new show next week when the team gets grateful for what we have before it all goes to shirt. Plus, you get more opera headlines, more hot takes, and more lickety. Join us.